Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. Hansel and Gretel. Near the edge of a vast and shadow-haunted forest, there dwelt a poor woodcutter, his stern wife, and two small children. The boy was called Hansel, the girl Gretel. Their cottage was meager, their cupboard nearly bare, and in a season of famine that swept across the land, even the daily crust of bread could no longer be won. Hunger gnawed at their bellies by day and haunted their dreams by night. One evening, when the father tossed sleepless upon his straw bed, he groaned aloud. "What shall become of us? Our children cry for food, yet our hands are empty. There is no bread, not even a scrap of crust left in the bin." His wife turned her cold eyes toward him and whispered, harsh as the crack of dry wood, "I will tell you what must be done. At dawn, we shall lead the children deep into the forest, into the thickest part where no path returns. We shall give each a small piece of bread, then abandon them by the fire. They will never find their way home, and thus we shall be rid of them." The man shuddered. "No, wife, my heart cannot endure such cruelty. To leave them among wolves and wild beasts? Better we perish together than feed the forest with our children's bones." But the woman mocked him. "Then sharpen 4 stakes and carve our coffins, for soon we shall all starve. You weak fool! Will you let sentiment drag us all into the grave?" So relentless was her tongue that the man's spirit faltered, and he gave way, though grief weighed on him like an axe of stone. Stones in the moonlight. Hansel and Gretel, lying wakeful with empty stomachs, overheard every word. Gretel wept bitterly. "Brother, we are lost, doomed to die in the forest." But Hansel put his arm about her and whispered with quiet faith, "Do not fear, little sister. I will think of something. God will not forsake us." When the house was sunk in slumber, Hansel rose, donned his coat, and crept outside. The moon shone clear, and the pale stones scattered before the hut glittered like silver coins spilled from heaven's purse. He bent low, gathered his pockets full, and returned to bed. "Rest now, Gretel. Sleep in peace. Tomorrow you shall see what I mean." The first journey into the forest. At the break of day, the woman woke them roughly. "Rise, you idlers. We go to the forest to cut wood." She gave each a thin slice of bread. "That is for your dinner. Do not eat it sooner, for you will have no more." Hansel slipped his into his pocket, already heavy with stones. On the path, he often lagged behind, turning his head to look back at the cottage. "What do you gaze at, Hansel?" asked the father. "I am looking at my white kitten upon the roof, who waves me farewell." "Simpleton!" cried the wife. "That is no cat, only the morning sun flashing on the chimney." But Hansel, each time he turned, dropped one of his shining stones upon the ground. At last, they reached the heart of the forest. A fire was kindled, and the mother said, "Sit here, children, warm yourselves, and rest. We go deeper to hew wood. When we are ready, we shall return." Hansel and Gretel sat by the crackling blaze, ate their dry bread, and listened to what they thought was the father chopping wood. yet it was only the wind tossing a dead branch. At length, weary with hunger, they slept. Night fell, cold and deep. Gretel woke first and sobbed, "How shall we ever find our way home?" But Hansel comforted her. "Wait for the moon, sister, then you shall see." And when the round moon rose, its light struck upon the white stones, gleaming like a silver path through the darkness. Hand in hand, the children followed the trail, walking the whole night until, at dawn, the familiar cottage stood before them. Their father's heart leapt with joy, though the woman scolded harshly. The second betrayal. Yet famine still reigned. Soon the cruel wife whispered once more, "We have only half a loaf left. After that, the end. Again we must cast them off, this time farther, deeper, where no return is possible." The man groaned. "Better to share our last morsel with the children." But she overbore him with bitter words, and he yielded. Hansel and Gretel, sleepless and hollow-eyed, overheard again. Hansel slipped from bed to fetch stones, but the door had been locked. Still he whispered, "Do not despair, Gretel. God will help us." Next morning, each child received a piece of bread smaller than before. On the way, Hansel crumbled his portion into tiny bits, letting them fall upon the path. When asked what he stared at, he answered, "A little dove sits on the roof to bid me farewell." The woman snarled, "That is no dove, but the morning sun." They were led deeper than ever, into a part of the forest unknown. Another fire was kindled. Again the parents departed. Again the children slept. At night Hansel urged, "Wait, sister, till the moon rises. Then we shall see the crumbs I have scattered." But when the moon lifted her pale face, there was nothing. Every crumb had been eaten by the birds of the wood. Lost, they wandered through night and day, gnawing wild berries, stumbling with weakness. On the third day, faint with hunger, they sank beneath a tree, and there might have died, had not a snow-white bird alighted, singing sweetly. When they followed, it led them to a strange little house, the house of bread. The walls were baked of bread, the roof shingled with cake, the windows glazed with clear sugar. Hansel cried, "Look, Gretel, a banquet sent from heaven. I shall eat a piece of the roof, and you may nibble the window pane." But as they ate, a thin voice sang from within, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is gnawing at my house?" Hansel answered quickly, "Only the wind, only the wind." They went on eating until the door opened, and an ancient woman appeared, leaning on a crutch. Her eyes were red as burning coals, her smile stretched wide and strange, yet her voice was honeyed. "Dear children, come inside. You must be cold and hungry. Here is milk and pancakes and apples, and nuts aplenty." Within they found a table laden and soft white beds to rest in. Thinking themselves in paradise, they lay down and slept. But the old woman was a witch who built her sugared house to lure children. Her eyes, though weak, could smell the nearness of human flesh like a wolf. That night she laughed to herself, "Now I have them, they shall not escape." The witch's snare. At dawn she seized Hansel, dragged him to a small cage, and locked the iron bars. However he cried and pleaded, it was no use. Then she shook Gretel awake. "Up, lazy bones, fetch water, and cook something good for your brother. He shall be fattened, and when he is plump enough, I shall eat him." Gretel wept bitterly, but fear forced her to obey. From then on, Hansel received rich meals, while Gretel lived on scraps and shells. Each morning the witch croaked, "Hansel, Put out your finger, that I may feel if you are fat yet." But Hansel held out a little bone he had found. Her failing eyes deceived her, and she wondered why he never grew plumper. After 4 weeks, her patience broke. "Fat or lean, tomorrow you die," she cried. "Fire and deliverance." Early next morning she ordered Gretel to heat the oven. "We shall bake first, then feast. Creep in, girl, and see if it is hot enough." But Gretel, sensing her wicked plan, feigned ignorance. "I do not know how to look inside." "Stupid goose," hissed the witch. "The hole is wide enough, see? I could creep in myself." And she thrust her head forward. Quick as lightning, Gretel pushed her hard and slammed the door shut, dropping the iron bolt. The witch howled and shrieked, but the flames consumed her, and her cries died away in smoke. Gretel ran to Hansel, unlocked his cage, and shouted, "We are free! The witch is dead!" Hansel sprang out like a bird from its prison. They embraced, wept, laughed, and danced about. Searching the house, they found chests of pearls, jewels, and gold. Hansel stuffed his pockets, and Gretel filled her apron. The journey home. They set out, but soon came to a wide stream. No bridge, no stepping stones, no boat was there. Then a white duck swam toward them. Gretel called, "Duck, duck, so mild and good, carry us over the water and wood. No bridge, no stone, no wooden beam, bear us across on your snowy stream." The duck obeyed. Hansel crossed first, then Gretel. Onward they went, until the woods grew familiar. At last their father's cottage stood before them. The man, who had not known a single hour of peace since leaving them, clasped them with tears of joy. The cruel wife was dead. Hansel poured handfuls of jewels upon the floor, and Gretel spilled pearls from her apron until the room gleamed. So all care ended, and they lived together in joy and plenty. My tale is told. Run, little mouse, run, and whoever can catch it may weave from its fur a cap both warm and fine. The Three Children of Fortune. Once there was an old man who had grown weary with age, and when he felt his time was short, he called his 3 sons to his side. His voice was frail, but his words carried weight, for they were his last counsel. "My sons," said he, "I have no chest of silver to divide among you, no land, no house, no treasures. All that I can leave are 3 small things, and though they may seem of little worth, in them lies your fortune if you use them wisely. Take them to places where no one has yet seen such marvels, and there you will prosper." Then he gave to the eldest a cock, to the second a scythe, and to the third a cat. Soon after he died, and the brothers prepared themselves for the journey into the wide world. The eldest set out first, carrying the cock. He wandered through towns and villages, but everywhere he went, the creature was already known. In cities, he saw cocks of iron upon steeples turning with the wind, and in the countryside he heard their crowing from every farm. People laughed at his pride, for to them the cock was no marvel, and he began to fear that his father's gift was of no use. Yet he did not give up. At length, after long travel, he reached an island where no cock had ever been seen, and the people there lived without knowing the hours of night. They could tell morning from evening, but when darkness fell, if they lay awake, none could say whether dawn was near or far. The young man showed them his bird and said, "Behold this noble creature. See how it bears a crown upon its head like a king, and spurs like a knight upon its feet. Hear how it crows 3 times in the night at hours that never fail, and when it cries the 3rd time, the sun soon rises. If by day it crows, Then mark my words, the weather is about to change." The people marveled greatly. That night they kept awake, listening with delight as the cock crowed at 2, at 4, and at 6. They rejoiced, for the passing hours had never been made so clear. They asked eagerly whether the bird might be bought, and he answered, "Give me as much gold as an ass can carry." They declared it a small price for so wondrous a thing, and paid it willingly. Laden with treasure, the eldest returned home in triumph. The second brother, seeing this, said, "If my brother has grown rich with his cock, why should I not prosper with my scythe?" So he journeyed forth, carrying the shining blade upon his shoulder. In every land he entered, men already had scythes, and no one marveled at his gift. He wandered long without success. At last he came to an island where men knew nothing of scythes. When their fields of grain were ripe, they dragged out cannons and shot at the stalks. The thunder was dreadful, the smoke darkened the sky, and the harvest was ruined, for some balls flew too high, while others broke only the ears and left the stems standing. Much was lost, and the people grew weary of the toil and noise. Then the brother stepped into the field and swung his scythe. Back and forth he moved, and the stalks fell silently in neat rows. The people stood with mouths open and cried, "This is a marvel." They begged him to part with the tool, and he answered, "Give me a horse laden with as much gold as it can carry." They agreed at once and gave him what he asked, so he too returned home with great wealth. Now the youngest wished to try his fortune with the cat. He fared no better on the mainland than his brothers had at first, for cats were everywhere, and so many that newborn kittens were drowned without pity. He wandered far, but hope dwindled. At last he crossed the sea and came to a kingdom where no man had ever seen such a beast. There the mice held rule, bold and many, running over tables and benches, gnawing at grain, cloth, and wood, and even in the royal palace they squeaked in every corner. The king himself was plagued and could find no remedy. But when the cat was loosed, she began her chase, swift and silent, and in little time cleared chamber after chamber. The people shouted for joy and begged the king to buy the creature. The king agreed and paid with a mule laden with gold. Thus the youngest returned home richer than them all. In the palace the cat lived merrily, and so many mice did she catch that the people could no longer count them. But one day, weary with the chase and parched with thirst, she sat still, lifted her head, and cried, "Mew, mew." At that cry, the king and his courtiers grew pale with fear, for never before had such a sound been heard. They believed a monster was within their walls. They fled from the palace and called council. "Shall we allow such a beast to dwell among us?" said they. "Better to endure the mice, which we have long suffered, than to risk our lives with this creature." So they sent a noble youth to speak with her and ask if she would leave in peace. But the cat, thirstier than before, only cried, "Mew, mew." The youth trembled, thinking she said, "Most certainly not, most certainly not." He brought this answer back to the king, and the counselors declared, "Then she shall be driven out by force." They wheeled out cannons, and the palace was battered until flames leapt from its windows and towers. The cat leapt lightly from a high window and fled unharmed, but the palace fell into ruin. So it was that 3 sons went out into the world with gifts that seemed of little worth, and each returned with wealth beyond measure. Yet while the cock brought order to time, and the scythe brought peace to the harvest, the cat, though she rid the land of mice, filled the king's heart with terror, and brought his palace to ashes. And to this day, the tale is told of how small gifts, wisely or fearfully received, may shape the fate of kingdoms. The Nightingale and the Blindworm. Once upon a time, in the farthest corner of an old forest, there stood a crooked little house built from moss and roots, half hidden beneath the shadows of a great linden tree. In that house lived two most curious creatures, a nightingale and a blindworm, and each of them had but one eye. Yet they were content, for they were gentle of heart and shared all things between them. When the rain fell, they huddled together under the same leaf. When the sun shone, they sang and whispered stories of the forest. The nightingale, with her one shining eye, could see the colors of dawn, and the blindworm, with her single silver one, could sense the trembling footsteps of ants in the dark. Thus they lived in peace and in strange harmony, neither envying the other, for each saw the world in her own way. But one morning, when the forest was dressed in the soft perfume of spring, a messenger robin fluttered down to their window and called out, "The daughter of the Wood King is to be wed. All who can sing or dance are invited to the wedding feast." The nightingale trembled with delight. "Oh, what joy it will be," she cried. "Music and light and laughter. Yet, alas, I have but one eye, and I fear to appear so incomplete before the others. Dear friend," she said sweetly to the blindworm, "would you lend me yours for one day only? I shall bring it back to you when the sun next rises. You know I would not ask if it were not for the sake of joy." The blindworm hesitated, for without her eye, she would be utterly blind. Still, her heart was kind, and she said, "Go then, my friend. May you see the feast in all its splendor. Bring it back to me when the stars fade." And she gently plucked the small gleaming eye from her head and placed it in the nightingale's feathers. That evening the nightingale flew away, shining like a star with two bright eyes. She sang through the twilight, and her song was so sweet that even the moon paused to listen. At the wedding, she was praised above all others, and the Wood King himself declared her the loveliest creature of the forest. When the dawn returned and the linden tree shivered in the early wind, the blindworm waited by the door. She waited all day and all through the next night, but the nightingale did not come. At last, on the third morning, the nightingale appeared, her feathers glistening with dew. "Welcome home," said the blindworm, her voice trembling with hope. "You have seen the joy of the world. Now give me back my eye, for the darkness has been long." But the nightingale turned her gaze upon the forest and upon her own reflection in a pool. With two eyes, she saw beauty on every side, the shimmer of leaves, the gold of morning, the blue of faraway sky. And her heart was filled with pride. "Dear friend," she said lightly, "I fear I have grown used to seeing on both sides. I would stumble without it. One who sings to kings should not be half blind. Surely you, who live in the cool dark, need no eyes for such things." Then the blindworm's heart broke within her, and she said, "You have taken what was mine and dressed it in sweet words. But hear me, false singer. As long as I crawl upon this earth, I shall take vengeance upon your children and your children's children. Wherever your nest is built, there I shall creep, and your eggs shall be my food." The nightingale laughed and sang, "Build where you may, blind one, I'll hide in the linden, high, high, high above the ground. Seek if you will, crawl if you must, but you shall never find me." and so she flew to the topmost boughs and built her nest among the blossoms. From that day onward, all nightingales have had 2 eyes, and all blindworms have had none. Yet their feud was never ended, for wherever a nightingale builds her nest and fills the air with her music, a blindworm hides below in the shadowed roots. She crawls upward, ever upward, drawn by ancient anger, seeking the eggs she can no longer see, remembering a promise whispered in darkness. For every song above, a silence below. And if you walk beneath a blooming linden tree on a still summer night and hear a nightingale sing, listen closely to the leaves beneath your feet. You may hear the faint hiss of the blindworm, forever keeping her vow. The Three Sluggards. Once upon a time, in a far-off kingdom girdled by dark forests and silver rivers, there reigned a certain king whose wisdom and justice were spoken of in every neighboring land. This king had 3 sons, and though each was unlike the other in temperament and look, he loved them with an equal and unwavering heart. Yet, as the seasons rolled on and the snows of many winters settled upon his brow, a great care began to trouble him. He knew that his days upon earth were numbered, and the question of who should bear his crown weighed upon him as heavily as iron. For many nights he lay awake in his high chamber, the moonlight falling pale upon the tapestries, and pondered the matter. Each son had been taught the arts of rule. Each knew the laws of the land, the tongues of foreign courts, and the customs of the people. But none shone brighter than the others, and the king's mind, like a compass without a true north, turned now to one, now to another. And so at last, when his strength began to fail, and the hour of his departure drew near, he resolved upon a curious test, a trial not of valor or wisdom, but of something far stranger. On a day when the palace bells tolled softly, and a hush lay over the halls, he summoned his sons to his bedside. The chamber was dim and still, the curtains drawn against the sun, and only the steady ticking of a clock and the faint rustle of the fire could be heard. The 3 princes came and knelt before their father, their heads bowed, for they saw that the end was close. "My beloved children," said the king, his voice thin but steadfast, "long have I ruled this realm, and long have I wondered which of you should succeed me. You are all dear to me, and none is more cunning or more bold than another. But last night, as the wind rattled the casements, a thought came to me, and it has taken root like a seed. Hear then my decree. Whosoever among you proves himself the laziest of all shall inherit the kingdom." At this, the princes looked at one another in astonishment, for never had they heard of such a judgment. Yet the king's eyes glimmered with a kind of quiet mischief, and they knew his word was final. The eldest prince, a tall youth with hair like dark copper, was the first to speak. "Father," he said with solemn pride, "the kingdom is mine by right of your command. For of all men living, none is more idle than I. When I lie upon my bed to rest, and a drop of rain falls upon my eye from the roof above, I will not lift my eyelid to brush it away, but let it fall and fall until sleep takes me. Such is my sloth." The second prince, whose eyes were gray as a winter sea, and whose hands were soft from sitting too long indoors, laughed softly and said, "Nay, brother, the crown belongs to me. My sons," he said, "each of you has spoken well, but one among you has carried this matter to its furthest edge. To lie still, though rain fall upon your face, is sloth indeed. To suffer burning rather than stir is greater still. But to accept death itself rather than move a single hand, this surpasses them all. Therefore, the crown shall be thine, my youngest. Upon thy brow it shall rest, and in thine hands, though they be slow, it shall remain. And so it came to pass. The king died, and the youngest son, who was laziest of all, was crowned. And what became of that kingdom under such a ruler, no one can say for certain, for some tales end at the wedding, and some at the coronation, and the rest is left to the telling of others. The Maid of Brakel. Long ago, in the little town of Brakel, there lived a maiden whose heart was restless. Though her hands were quick at the spindle, and her song was sweet in the fields, she dreamed above all of one thing: to have a husband of her own, a man to sit beside her by the hearth when the winter winds howled, and to walk with her in summer meadows when the larks sang overhead. Yet no suitor came, and so her longing grew sharper with every passing year. Now it so happened that at the foot of the hill called Hinnenberg there stood a small but venerable chapel dedicated to Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary. Many a young woman had gone there with prayers whispered in secret, for Saint Anne was thought to be kindly toward maidens who sought good husbands. And so, one bright morning, the girl of Brakel tied on her kerchief, slipped out unseen, and made her way down the winding path to the chapel. When she entered, the place seemed empty. The candles before the altar burned with steady flames. The painted saints gazed solemnly from the windows, and the silence was so deep that she could hear her own breath. Believing herself quite alone, she knelt, folded her hands, and began to sing a little song that she herself had made. "O holy Saint Anne, grant me soon a man. You know him full well, by Sutmer Gate he does dwell. His hair is golden, his manner kind, to such a husband I'd be resigned. O holy Saint Anne, grant me soon a man." Her voice was soft at first, but soon it rang through the chapel like the note of a bird hidden in the rafters. She sang with such hope and longing that even the carved wooden figures seemed to lean closer to hear. But behind the altar, concealed by a curtain, stood the parish clerk. He had been setting the service books in order, and now listened with widening eyes. The more she sang, the more he frowned, until at last he could not keep silence. In a voice rough and gruff as a barking hound, he cried out, "Thou shalt not have him! Thou shalt not have him!" The maiden started as if struck. Her heart leapt into her throat, for she believed not that a man had spoken, but that the little child, Mary, carved there beside her mother Anne on the altar, had suddenly found voice. To think that such holy lips should scold her. Her cheeks flamed, her eyes flashed, and she shook her head in anger. "Fiddle-de-day," she cried. "What conceited airs! Hold your tongue, saucy child, and let your good mother speak instead." And with that she rose, stamped her foot upon the chapel floor, and swept out in high dudgeon, leaving the clerk behind the altar half frightened, half amused, and perhaps a little ashamed of his rough jest. The townsfolk of Brakel told the tale for many a year afterward, laughing at the boldness of the maiden who dared scold the Virgin's own image. Some said she did at last find her golden-haired husband, for persistence and sharpness of tongue often win where meekness fails. Others whispered that the clerk himself, who had played the trick, later came knocking at her door, and that the quarrel in the chapel was the first spark of a lifelong match. But whether true or not, the story clung to Brakel like ivy on a wall, and to this day they speak of the girl who prayed to Saint Anne and who mistook a man's rough cry for the voice of a holy child. Simeli Mountain. Once, long ago, there lived two brothers. One was wealthy, wrapped in fine garments, his barns filled with grain, his cellars heavy with wine. The other was poor, so poor that the shoes fell from his feet, and the roof above his children let the rain pour in. Though bound by blood, the rich brother gave nothing, neither crumb nor coin, to the poor one. Thus, the poor man labored day and night, scratching out a living by buying and selling small measures of corn. Many a week he did so badly that his wife and children sat before an empty table, staring at the bare boards where bread should have lain. Hunger became their daily companion. One day, when fortune pressed hard upon him, the poor man pushed his barrow through the forest, hoping to sell a little grain in the next village. The day was hot, and the air heavy. Suddenly, his weary eyes beheld something strange. To one side of the path rose a mountain, bald and bare, its face gray and smooth, as though no tree had ever dared to grow there. He rubbed his eyes in wonder, for never in all his years had he seen such a mountain in that place before. He stood still, his hands resting on the barrow handles, staring in astonishment. As he gazed, the sound of heavy footsteps came thundering through the stillness of the wood. From between the trees emerged 12 great wild men, tall as giants, with hair unkempt and eyes fierce as wolves. The poor man's heart leapt with terror, for he thought, "Surely these must be robbers who will take both my barrow and my life." Quickly he shoved the cart into the thicket, scrambled up a tree, and crouched among the branches, scarcely daring to breathe. The 12 strode straight to the mountain. Their leader raised his arms and cried in a voice that echoed like thunder, "Simeli Mountain, Simeli Mountain, open!" And lo, the lifeless rock trembled and split down the middle. A dark passage yawned wide, and the 12 men passed within. As soon as the last cloak had vanished, the mountain closed again, so smoothly that no crack remained. The poor man clung to the tree, trembling, his eyes wide as saucers. After a short while, the mountain shuddered once more, opened, and the 12 men came forth. Each bore a heavy sack upon his back, bulging so full that the seams seemed ready to burst. When they stood again in the daylight, the leader cried, "Simeli Mountain, Simeli Mountain, shut thyself." At once the mountain closed, and no sign of a door or cleft was left. The men marched away, their sacks glittering faintly with the weight of treasure within. When they were far gone, curiosity overcame fear. The poor man slipped down from the tree, crept to the mountain's side, and whispered the very words he had heard. "Simeli Mountain, Simeli Mountain, open!" And behold, the mountain obeyed him too. The rock split asunder, and a vast cavern stretched before his eyes. Within lay marvels beyond imagining, heaps of gold, like hills of yellow corn, rivers of silver spilling in gleaming piles, and behind them mounds of pearls, rubies, sapphires, and jewels that blazed like a captured rainbow. The cavern glittered as though stars themselves had fallen there. The poor man's heart beat fast. He did not know whether to take or to flee. At last, with trembling hands, he filled his pockets only with gold coins, leaving the pearls and precious stones untouched, for he thought, "These are too fine for me, a poor man. Gold will buy bread enough." Then he spoke again the words, "Simeli Mountain, Simeli Mountain, shut thyself." The mountain closed, and he went home with his barrow, his pockets heavy with gold. That night his children ate their fill, and his wife wept for joy. From that day forward, the poor man was no longer pressed by hunger. He bought bread and wine, clothed his children, helped his neighbors, and gave to the beggars at the roadside. He lived uprightly, his heart light with gratitude. But as gold does not last forever, so his first supply at length was spent. Then he returned to the mountain, each time borrowing from his rich brother a bushel measure in which to carry his grain. Yet instead of corn, he measured out the treasure, though he took still only gold, never the rarest stones. The rich brother soon grew suspicious. He saw how his poor brother's household had changed. There was meat on the table, laughter in the yard, and clothes of good cloth on his children. Envy gnawed at him. How comes he by such fortune? Thought he. When the poor man once more asked to borrow the bushel, the rich brother smeared the bottom with pitch. When the measure was returned, a gold coin stuck fast to it. He stormed to his brother's door and cried, "What hast thou been measuring with my bushel? Speak, or I will bring thee before the magistrate." The poor man, frightened and pressed, confessed everything just as it had happened: the mountain, the wild men, and the treasures within. The rich man's heart burned with greed. He ordered his carriage, drove straight to the mountain, and shouted in a voice eager with desire, "Simeli Mountain, Simeli Mountain, open!" The mountain opened, and he stepped within. When his eyes beheld the treasures, he was half mad with longing. He rushed from heap to heap, grasping pearls, snatching rubies, filling his arms with sapphires, and at last loading himself with as many precious stones as he could stagger beneath. His thoughts were filled with nothing but their glitter and weight. But when he turned to leave, his greed betrayed him. He had forgotten the right name. He cried out, "Simeli Mountain, Simeli Mountain, open!" But the mountain lay silent, cold and unmoving. Again and again he cried, "Simeli Mountain, open!" Yet the stone did not stir, for he had spoken the wrong word. Terror seized him. He dropped his load, wrung his hands, but the more he thought, the more his mind tangled in confusion. The true word had slipped from him forever. Evening fell, the ground rumbled, the mountain opened, and in marched the 12 wild men. They spied him at once and roared with laughter. "Ha! The bird that has stolen twice is caught at last. Didst thou think we had not marked thy coming and going? Twice thou didst slip away, but this third time thou shalt never leave." The rich man fell to his knees. He cried, "It was not I. It was my brother." He begged, pleaded, promised them gold and land if they spared him. But his words were vain. The 12 raised their swords, and in that dark cavern, his greedy heart beat its last. They struck off his head, and so ended the rich brother, who sought to take more than was his share. But the poor brother, who had taken only what sufficed, lived in peace, giving to others as he was able, never again daring to set foot within the mountain of Simeli. The Turnip. Once upon a time, there lived 2 brothers, both of whom had served bravely as soldiers in the wars. One brother, through fortune and cunning, had grown wealthy, dressed in fine clothes, and feasted at noble tables. The other, though equally valiant, returned from the field with little more than the coat on his back and the ache of hunger in his belly. For a long while he wandered in want, until at last he said to himself, "Better to try my hand at the earth than perish with an empty purse. If I cannot thrive as a soldier, perhaps the soil will show me mercy." So he laid aside his soldier's coat and took up the life of a humble farmer. He bought a small patch of land, poor in soil but rich in hope, and there he dug, hoed, and sowed what little seed he could afford. Turnip seed, the food of the common folk. He tended the field with his own weary hands, and when the shoots broke through the soil, he felt his heart stir with a quiet joy. Among the many small turnips, one plant began to grow larger, rounder, and stronger than the rest. Day by day it swelled as though it drank the very strength of the earth, until the man could scarce believe his eyes. It grew and grew, never ceasing, until it seemed that heaven itself had blessed it with enchantment. So wondrous was its size that folk from the neighboring fields whispered it was not a turnip at all, but the queen of turnips. For never before had such a marvel been seen, nor would such a marvel be seen again. At length it became so vast that it filled an entire cart by itself, and 2 strong oxen strained at the yoke to pull its monstrous weight. The farmer stood before it, scratching his head in perplexity. What shall I do with such a thing? If I sell it, what coin could possibly repay its wonder? If I eat it, I will gain no more nourishment than from a common turnip, and I would sooner burst than consume it whole. No, no. Perhaps the best fate for such a gift is to lay it before the king himself. He may smile upon my offering, and fortune may yet return to me. So with great care he loaded the giant turnip onto a cart, yoked his oxen, and made his slow journey to the royal palace. When he entered the great hall and presented it, the courtiers gasped, and the king himself rose from his throne in astonishment. "What marvel is this?" cried the king. "Many strange wonders have crossed my sight, but never such a monster as this root. Tell me, from what seed did this spring? Or are you perhaps a child of fortune, a luck-born, and have stumbled upon this treasure by chance?" The farmer bowed low and answered humbly, "No, my lord, no fortune child am I. I am but a poor soldier who could no longer bear his poverty. I hung my soldier's coat upon a nail and turned my hands to the soil. I have a brother, known to you, who is wealthy and honored, yet I, because I have nothing, am forgotten by all." The king, hearing this, was moved with compassion. "Thy poverty shall trouble thee no more," said he. "For thy gift I will raise thee to equal thy rich brother." And so the king bestowed upon him lands and meadows, gold and cattle, until the poor man found himself richer than he had ever dreamed, his barns filled and his fields wide. Indeed, his fortune soon outshone that of his wealthy brother, who, upon hearing the tale, was consumed by envy. "Shall my beggarly brother become greater than I?" he muttered. "If he has won such riches with a single turnip, what fortune shall I not win if I bring the king treasures more fitting, gold and noble steeds?" So the rich brother gathered his finest horses and great bags of gold and rode in splendor to the king. With a proud heart he laid them at the monarch's feet, certain he would receive a treasure beyond imagining. Yet the king, smiling, said, "Rare indeed is your gift, but I have nothing rarer, nothing more wondrous to bestow in return than the great turnip your brother gave me. This, then, shall be your reward." And he ordered the monstrous turnip to be loaded into a cart and sent home with the rich man. When the proud brother beheld the turnip at his gate, rage swelled in his heart, and he knew not on whom to vent his fury. Dark thoughts crept into his mind, whispering of blood and betrayal, until at last he resolved to kill his brother and claim his fortune. He hired wicked men to do the deed, and then went to his brother with a feigned smile. "Brother," said he, "I know of a hidden treasure buried deep in the wood. Come with me, and we shall dig it up together and divide it fairly." The honest brother, suspecting no ill, agreed, and followed him into the forest. There the murderers fell upon him, bound his hands, and made ready to hang him from a tree. Yet even as they set the rope about his neck, the sound of singing and the clatter of hooves came through the forest. Fear seized the villains, and in haste they thrust the poor man head first into a sack, tied it fast, hung it upon a high branch, and fled. The prisoner struggled in the sack until at last he tore a small hole through which he could thrust his head. And lo, along the path rode a young student, a merry fellow, singing a bright song as he journeyed. The man in the sack called down, "Good day, you come at a lucky hour." The student started, looked about, and cried, "Who calls me?" "Raise your eyes," said the voice, "for I sit aloft in the sack of wisdom. In a short while I have learned wondrous things, more than any school can teach. I know the stars and their courses, the winds and their paths, the secrets of herbs, the healing of sickness, the voices of birds, and the virtues of stones. Soon I shall descend wiser than all men on earth. If you would enter the sack, you too would feel wisdom pour into your soul." The student, astonished and eager, said, "Blessed be the hour I have found thee. Let me climb in, I beg you, that I too may taste such wisdom." The man in the sack replied as though unwilling, "Not yet, not yet. A little while I must remain, for one last secret waits to be learned. But if you will wait and promise me good words, perhaps I shall let you in." The student grew impatient. "I cannot wait, for my thirst for knowledge burns too strongly. Let me in at once." At last the man pretended to yield. "Very well. Lower the sack by the rope, and when I step out, you may climb in." The student gladly untied the sack and set the man free. Then he cried, "Now, draw me up at once, so that wisdom may flow into me." "Halt," said the other. With a cunning grin, he seized the student, thrust him head first into the sack, tied it tightly, and hauled him high into the tree. There he swung in the air, while the man below laughed and said, "How fares it with you, my wise friend? Already wisdom flows into you, and by the time you come down, you will have learnt much indeed. Remain there in silence until knowledge ripens." With that he mounted the student's horse, took up his song, and rode merrily away. Only an hour later did he send someone to release the poor student from the sack of wisdom. The Three Army Surgeons. 3 army surgeons who thought they knew their art perfectly were traveling about the world, and they came to an inn where they wanted to pass the night. The host asked whence they came and whither they were going. "We are roaming about the world and practicing our art. Just show me for once in a way what you can do," said the host. Then the first said he would cut off his hand and put it on again early next morning. The second said he would tear out his heart and replace it next morning. The third said he would cut out his eyes and heal them again next morning. "If you can do that," said the innkeeper, "you have learnt everything." They, however, had a salve with which they rubbed themselves, which joined parts together, and they carried the little bottle in which it was constantly with them. Then they cut the hand, heart, and eyes from their bodies, as they had said they would, and laid them all together on a plate, and gave it to the innkeeper. The innkeeper gave it to a servant who was to set it in the cupboard and take good care of it. The girl, however, had a lover in secret, who was a soldier. When therefore the innkeeper, the 3 army surgeons, and everyone else in the house were asleep, the soldier came and wanted something to eat. The girl opened the cupboard and brought him some food, and in her love forgot to shut the cupboard door again. She seated herself at the table by her lover, and they chattered away together. While she sat so contentedly there, thinking of no ill luck, the cat came creeping in, found the cupboard open, took the hand and heart and eyes of the 3 army surgeons, and ran off with them. When the soldier had done eating, and the girl was taking away the things and going to shut the cupboard, she saw that the plate which the innkeeper had given her to take care of was empty. Then she said in a fright to her lover, "Ah, miserable girl, what shall I do? The hand is gone, the heart and the eyes are gone too. What will become of me in the morning?" "Be easy," said he. "I will help thee out of thy trouble. There is a thief hanging outside on the gallows. I will cut off his hand." "Which hand was it?" "The right one." Then the girl gave him a sharp knife, and he went and cut the poor sinner's right hand off and brought it to her. After this he caught the cat and cut its eyes out, and now nothing but the heart was wanting. "Have you not been killing, and are not the dead pigs in the cellar?" said he. "Yes," said the girl. "That's well," said the soldier, and he went down and fetched a pig's heart. The girl placed all together on the plate and put it in the cupboard, and when after this her lover took leave of her, she went quietly to bed. In the morning, when the 3 army surgeons got up, they told the girl she was to bring them the plate on which the hand, heart, and eyes were lying. Then she brought it out of the cupboard, and the first fixed the thief's hand on, and smeared it with his salve, and it grew to his arm directly. The second took the cat's eyes, and put them in his own head. The third fixed the pig's heart firm in the place where his own had been. And the innkeeper stood by, admired their skill, and said he had never yet seen such a thing as that done, and would sing their praises and recommend them to everyone. Then they paid their bill and traveled farther. As they were on their way, the one with the pig's heart did not stay with them at all, but wherever there was a corner, he ran to it and rooted about in it with his nose as pigs do. The others wanted to hold him back by the tail of his coat, but that did no good. He tore himself loose and ran wherever the dirt was thickest. The second also behaved very strangely. He rubbed his eyes and said to the others, "Comrades, what is the matter? I don't see at all. Will one of you lead me, so that I do not fall?" Then with difficulty they traveled on till evening, when they reached another inn. They went into the bar together, and there at a table in the corner sat a rich man counting money. The one with the thief's hand walked round about him, made a sudden movement twice with his arm, and at last, when the stranger turned away, he snatched at the pile of money and took a handful from it. One of them saw this and said, "Comrade, what art thou about? Thou must not steal shame on thee." "Ay," said he, "but how can I stop myself? My hand twitches, and I am forced to snatch things whether I will or not." After this, they lay down to sleep, and while they were lying there, it was so dark that no one could see his own hand. All at once, the one with the cat's eyes awoke, aroused the others, and said, "Brothers, just look up. Do you see the white mice running about there?" The 2 sat up, but could see nothing. Then said he, "Things are not right with us. We have not got back again what is ours. We must return to the innkeeper. He has deceived us." They went back, therefore, the next morning, and told the host they had not got what was their own again, that the first had a thief's hand, the second cat's eyes, and the third a pig's heart. The innkeeper said that the girl must be to blame for that, and was going to call her, but when she had seen the three coming, she had run out by the back door and not come back. Then the three said he must give them a great deal of money, or they would set his house on fire. He gave them what he had, and whatever he could get together, and the three went away with it. It was enough for the rest of their lives, but they would rather have had their own proper organs. The Willow-Wren and the Bear. Once, in the full warmth of summer, when the trees rustled with green, and the air was heavy with the hum of bees, the bear and the wolf were walking side by side through the forest. The bear lifted his head, for from a thicket came the sweetest song he had ever heard. The notes rose clear and high, then sank soft and low, like silver threads of music weaving through the branches. "Brother Wolf," said the bear, halting and pricking up his ears, "what bird is it that sings so wondrously well? Never have I heard such a melody." "That," said the wolf with great seriousness, "is none other than the king of all birds. Before him every creature of the wood must bow down, for he is lord of the air. Yet in truth it was but the little willow-wren, small and brown, who sat upon a twig and sang as his kind always sang." "If that be so," said the bear, his eyes gleaming with curiosity, "then I would very much like to behold this king's palace. Come, brother, take me thither, for I must see with my own eyes the dwelling of so noble a monarch." But the wolf shook his head. "It cannot be done in such haste, old growler. We must wait until the queen herself arrives, for one does not march unbidden into royal halls." Not long after, the queen of the willow-wrens indeed appeared, flitting swiftly with a morsel in her beak. Behind her came the king, and together they fed their young ones hidden in a hole of the tree. The bear's paws itched to stride forward, but again the wolf tugged him back by the sleeve of his shaggy coat. "Patience," whispered the wolf. "We must wait until the lord and lady are gone, else we show disrespect." So they stood still and watched until the birds had flown off. Only then did the bear lumber near, thrust his great snout into the hole, and peer within. There he saw not a grand palace, nor gold, nor precious stones, but a poor little nest lined with moss and feathers, where 5 or 6 downy chicks lay stretching their thin necks. "Is this the royal palace?" cried the bear, with a loud laugh that shook his belly. "A wretched hovel it is, and you, you are no king's children, but ragged common brats." At these words the nestlings bristled with fury. Their tiny wings quivered, their beaks opened wide, and they cried shrilly, "That we are not. Our parents are honest and honorable folk. Bear, thou wilt have to answer for this insult and dearly pay for it." The bear grumbled uneasily and drew back, and the wolf, too, felt troubled in his heart. They slunk away into the shadows, yet the young willow-wrens did not cease their clamoring. When next the king and queen returned with food, the little ones turned their heads aside and wailed, "We will not eat, no, not so much as a fly's leg, though we starve with hunger, until you have proved to us that we are indeed respectable children. The bear has been here and has mocked us." The old king ruffled his feathers, and his eyes flashed with anger. "Be easy, my children," said he, "for justice shall be done. That coarse beast shall be punished." Straightway the king and queen flew to the bear's den and called within. "Old growler, Why hast thou brought shame upon our nest and insulted our young? For this thou shalt suffer. We declare war upon thee, a war of blood and feathers." The news spread swiftly through wood and meadow. The bear summoned all the four-footed creatures, the ox with his heavy horns, the ass with his long ears, the nimble deer, the fleet hare, and every beast that ran upon the earth. Each was commanded to join the cause of the bear. Meanwhile, the willow-wren called forth every creature that had wings, not only the proud falcons and wise owls, the starlings and sparrows, but also the smallest midges, the hornets armed with stings, the bees from their hives, and even the flies that swarmed in summer heat. The sky grew dark with their numbers. Now, before the battle, the willow-wren sent out spies to learn who led the enemy host. The gnat, who was small and crafty, flew into the forest where the beasts were gathered. She crept beneath the leaf of a tree, where she could hear their counsel. There the bear stood like a mountain, and he summoned the fox before him. "Fox," said the bear, "thou art the slyest of all beasts. Thou shalt be our commander." "Good," said the fox, curling his red tail proudly. "But what sign shall we agree upon, so that all may know when to charge and when to flee?" None could answer. Then the fox said, "Behold my tail. It is long and bushy, and when I hold it high aloft, like a plume of red feathers, then all goes well, and you must press forward. But when it droops low, then the battle is lost, and you must run with all speed." The gnat, having heard every word, flew swiftly back and told the willow-wren all in great detail. At dawn, the armies gathered. The ground shook with the thunder of hooves and paws, and the sky hummed and swarmed with wings. The willow-wren gave his command, and down flew the hornet, straight beneath the fox's tail. With all his might he stung once. The fox yelped, lifting one leg, but bore it and kept his tail high. At the second sting, he winced sorely, and let the tail fall for but a moment. At the third sting, he could endure no more. With a cry, he clamped his tail between his legs. When the beasts saw this, they thought the signal given for defeat. Terror seized them, and they fled each to his hole, leaving the field to the birds. Thus the hosts of the air triumphed, and the beasts were scattered. Then the king and queen flew home, with joy to their children. "Rejoice, little ones," they cried. "The battle is won. Eat and drink to your heart's desire." But the nestlings shook their heads. "No feast for us until the bear himself comes to our nest and begs pardon, confessing before our eyes that we are honorable children." So the willow-wren flew again to the bear's cave and called sternly, "Growler, creep forth and humble thyself before my brood, else every rib in thy body shall be broken." The bear, trembling with fear, came forth, lumbered to the nest, and bowed his head low. With a groan, he begged the pardon of the chicks, confessing their worth. Only then did the young wrens clap their wings, laugh, and eat greedily, making merry far into the night. And so it was proven that even the smallest may win honor when they stand together, and that prideful words, once spoken, must one day be answered. The Lord's animals and the devil's. In the beginning of days, when the Lord God fashioned the creatures of the earth, he gave to each its form and purpose. The birds received wings to cross the heavens. The fishes were granted fins to stir the waters, and the beasts of the field were shaped to walk the green pastures. Among them all, he chose out the wolf to be his faithful hound, to keep watch and serve as guardian over his works. Yet in the vastness of his creation, the Lord forgot one small creature, the goat. Now the devil, whoever seeks to twist what is lacking, perceived the omission, and in his envy resolved to fashion goats of his own making. With cunning hands he shaped them, slender of body, nimble of foot, and he set upon each a long and splendid tail, swaying behind like a banner. At first he took great pride in this handiwork, and thought himself clever, for the goats skipped merrily through the meadows and seemed pleasing to behold. But when the goats went to pasture, mischief soon followed. Their proud tails were forever caught in thorns and hedges. Each day the devil was forced to leave his dark business and untangle them, pulling and tugging with no small effort. Many times he scratched his hands upon the briars, and many times he cursed his foolish labor. At last his anger rose so high that he seized the goats one by one, and in a fit of rage he bit off every tail with his own teeth. From that hour the goats bore nothing but short stumps, as all may see even today. Yet when they roamed free without their tails, a greater trouble began. For the Lord looked down from heaven and saw how the goats gnawed at young trees until the bark was ruined, and how they trampled the noble vines heavy with fruit. Wherever tender shoots or blossoms grew, the goats brought waste and destruction. This grieved the Lord, for he delights in what is fruitful and fair. In his mercy he summoned the wolves, his appointed hounds, and bade them guard the gardens and vineyards. Swiftly they descended, and they tore in pieces the troublesome goats that ventured there. When the devil beheld this, fury burned in his breast. He went before the Lord and cried, "Thine own creatures have destroyed mine." But the Lord answered calmly, "Why didst thou make that which harms and despoils?" The devil replied, "I was compelled, for all my thoughts run ever toward mischief, and what I shape must needs carry that nature. Therefore thou must pay me great damages for the loss I have suffered." Then the Lord said, "I will pay thee thy due, but not today. Return when the oak leaves fall, and then thy payment shall be ready and counted." So the seasons turned, and when autumn winds blew and the leaves fell in showers, the devil came boldly to claim his reward. But the Lord spoke once more. "In the city of Constantinople stands a mighty oak tree, whose leaves still cling fast. Until that tree is bare, thy payment is not yet owed." The devil gnashed his teeth and cursed, but he set out to find the tree. Through forest and wilderness he wandered for 6 long months, raging as he went, until at last he found the tall oak standing green against the sky, its leaves unfallen. Yet when he returned at length to claim his right, behold, all the oaks across the wide world had already clothed themselves again in the fresh leaves of spring. Thus the devil's claim was lost, and he must forfeit his damages. His wrath knew no bounds. In his spite he took the goats that remained, and with wicked hands he plucked out their eyes. Into the empty sockets he set his own, so that from that day forth goats bore the gaze of the devil himself, fiery, restless, and unclean. And this is why, to this very hour, goats are seen with bitten-off tails and strange, devilish eyes. And because he once shaped them in his likeness, the evil one is said to delight in taking the form of a goat whenever he walks upon the earth.